Welcome to the Insurance Brokers Podcast, Helpful Hints. Here we break down the best, most informative bits of our full-length interviews.
Process is one of the conversations that we have, and I know we've had conversations outside of this podcast about process and the implementation of. And I think having the process, sometimes the process gets lost in some of the hierarchical decision making because everybody's on their own process. And that's the sort of refreshing thing about the smaller to mid-sized brokers is exactly as you say, you can bring that process together. One of the things that we've found, and one of the conversations you and I have had, is about this: larger organizations tend to operate more in a sort of silo type structure. So you might have the marketing department, but how that marketing department interacts and coordinates with other departments sometimes gets lost in some of the bigger sizes. Is that something that you've come across? And what kind of things do you think we can put in place in the mid to larger organizations to try and minimize that impact?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Sarah. Let me tackle the process issue first and foremost. I think the big organizations are very good at process. They have the resource to introduce and implement and design processes that, for want of a better expression, help them to become more efficient. I think there's a question as to whether that efficiency is actually perceived by the client or whether it's more for the benefit of the organization itself. But sometimes process can actually drive the interaction with the client. We forget that the client really is king here. And whilst processes are really important to improve efficiency and hopefully improve the delivery of service and advice to a client, you can quite easily fall into the trap of becoming completely process driven, and you're almost expecting the client to fit with your process rather than the process meeting the client's needs. And I think some of the big firms are guilty of that. I think the processes become so rigid and so formal that all clients of all sizes and all shapes and all requirements are expected to fit into that process category. The smaller companies, I think, still need process. They have the opposite issue that they can become almost lacking in formality and lacking in process. So there is a need for process in even the smaller firms. But again, coming back to this point about agility and nimbleness, they can tailor the processes to not get in the way of the customer service, but to really support the customer's experience. And that, I think, is absolutely key. The silo thing actually exists across all sizes of business. The difference is with the smaller and medium-sized broker, it's an easier problem to address. In the large organizations, again, in my experience, they are so driven by silo P&Ls, there is almost no reward or encouragement to sell across lines. Of course, they're told to do that because they want to improve the growth for the business, but it's not done in a coordinated way, and it's certainly not done in a way where the client sits at the center of that strategy. The smaller companies, the ones that I'm working with, yes, you have silos, but they're much easier to break down, either through geography. It's a little bit more difficult now because we're all working from home, but when we're back in the office, putting people together in the right way, not simply because they work for particular parts of the business, but putting people together that complement each other's activities and can learn from one another and can work from one another is much easier in a smaller to medium-sized business than it is in a large multinational. So I think that the silo issue is one that both small, medium and large companies struggle with, but in my experience at least, much easier to resolve with at the smaller end of the scale.